Good afternoon, everyone. In the interest of time and respecting the program and its intentions to move us through the day at a particular pace and to give full time for afternoon sessions as well, we're going to go ahead and start our lunch session. So again, good afternoon. Let me say thank you to the Lemon Project Symposium organizers for an incredible 14th symposium and also for allowing us as representatives of the William and Mary Bray School Lab to be on this year's program. My name is Maureen Elgersman Lee. I am the director of the William and Mary Bray School Lab, and I also serve as the Mellon Engagement Coordinator for African American Heritage, operating out of the Office of Strategic Cultural Partnerships at William and Mary. It's my pleasure to serve as moderator for our lunch session today. We are looking at mapping as community healing, space, place, and legacy at the Williamsburg Bray School. And again, the Williamsburg Bray School was a school that operated here in Williamsburg from 1760 to 1774, educating but likely between 300 and 400 children of African descent, roughly ages 3 through 10, boys and girls. But the focus of our session is on mapping, and we are asking and answering in different ways. What can institutions do to reduce harm inflicted on Blacks and people of color? How do we get the country to acknowledge and address the continuing harm of past atrocities? And moving into the larger discussion, what would happen if museums, universities, and descendant communities utilize mapping in particular to change the landscape of the past as a form of healing? Our panel will look at various methodological techniques which can be applied to map community, as well as how this can be utilized within the framework of restorative justice. Presenting today, and I'm presenting them to you in the order that they will speak. Nicole Brown, who is a PhD student in American Studies at William and Mary and also serves as the graduate lab assistant for the William and Mary Bray School Lab. Mary Hannah Grier, who I'm so happy to have back, is a graduate of William and Mary and one of the first student thought partners in the Bray School Lab. And our final presenter will be Elizabeth Drembus, genealogist with the William and Mary Bray School Lab. So that everyone can both see and hear, they will be taking the podium for their presentations, and we will take questions afterwards. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. How is everyone? Good. I'm so glad to be with you this afternoon. Hi, Edwin. I'm so glad that you're getting settled. You have time to eat, time to talk. And I just want to hopefully be one part of your afternoon. A little bit about me. I know Maureen has mentioned, I am the William and Mary Bray School Lab assistant at the William and Mary Bray School Lab, while I am also a PhD student in the American Studies department at William and Mary. Some of you may also know me because I work part-time at Colonial Williamsburg, portraying Anne Wager and helping develop programming in relation to the Bray School at Colonial Williamsburg. And this project that I'm going to talk about with you today, and mapping in general, is very near and dear to my heart for a variety of reasons. But first and foremost, my intention with this project and to talk about today is how mapping can reinscribe the Black community, past and present, onto the landscape of Williamsburg, whether everyone wants you to or not, or they see it or they don't. And so that's really what I want to talk about with you today, is the last 7 years of my research, both as a master's student and now moving into the PhD program. And I hopefully will have something that you can take away with you today. So the question I really want to ask, that I really want you to be thinking about while I am speaking, is how does mapping help us understand the humanity of the Williamsburg Bray School community of scholars? They're not just names of students. I mean, we have some of their ages. We have many of their names, 86 names to be specific. But they're not just statistics on a piece of paper. or on a student list. These were children who lived, labored, loved, struggled, fought, built community in 18th century Williamsburg, and their descendants beyond that. And so how do we recenter them at the story of the Bray School when for so long they've been an afterthought? In order to do that, though, I do need to give you a little bit of context. Maureen fortunately told us a little bit about the Williamsburg Bray School. I just want to give you a bit of an underpinning about both the Williamsburg Bray School, how it ended up here, as well as who founded the school and what their motivations were, and very much how they also competed with the motivations of the students. So the Associates of Dr. Bray were the third largest Church of England charity in the Church of England in the 18th century. They operated from 1724 until 1979, but that's maybe a story for another day. What we know, though, is that they were founded by the Reverend Dr. Thomas Bray, who many in the Church of England in the 18th century thought would be the first bishop of North America. That never happened. He antagonized too many members of the aristocracy for it to happen. But he did found the Associates of Dr. Bray, meant to spread not just Christianity, but a specific brand of Protestantism across the British Empire. And one of the important things about talking about the Associates of Dr. Bray is that I don't wish to romanticize their intentions. They were colonialist and imperialist in their intentions, attempting to assimilate and indoctrinate students of African descent across the empire to one way of thinking. The records show us that they didn't actually accomplish that, but we have to talk about their motivations and make sure we're not looking at it through rose-colored glasses. So the Williamsburg Bray School, I could talk about this at great length, but to make a long story short, we know that upwards of 300 enslaved and free Black children attended the school. We have 3 student lists that have survived that we know currently are extant from the 14 years that the school ran from 1760 to 1774. The 86 names that I mentioned come from those 3 student lists, one in 1762, one in 1765, and one in 1769. But we know that the community of scholars was much wider than those 86 names. The instruction included reading, spelling, sewing, knitting, etiquette, and the Anglican doctrines. And I have talked at many other presentations about the different forms of curriculum, which we can discuss, but since that's not the focus of the presentation today, what I really want to focus on is the students and the names themselves, and specifically those 3 lists. We have 3 student lists that comprise 86 names. But is that all we have? And I ask this because a great part of my research has to do with archives. How do we know what we know, and where does that information come from? So an archive can be a variety of different things. It could be an archive that's centered on material culture, so needlework that has survived from the past. It can be an archive of written record, student lists, like I mentioned. It can be an archive of oral history. But archives are limited both because of the biases they implicitly and explicitly generate. Archivists decide what is important to keep and throw away. People decide what to write in a letter and what to exclude from it, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And my research has shown, especially as it relates to the Williamsburg Bray School, that archives can heal as much as they can hurt, because they are not comprehensive, even though we like to pretend sometimes that they are. Perhaps some of you have heard me say this quote before, but I always look to Leslie Harris and her work, in which she says, "There is no perfect archive where every historical question is answered clearly and without the need for interpretation and imagination. There are only more or less difficult archives." Saidiya Hartman, if some of you are familiar with her, has described the archive for the African diasporic world as a tomb, a death sentence. Why does she say that? Well, it's not because we can't learn things from the archive, but very often enslaved people and those of African descent are written about as statistics in the letters of those who either enslaved them or the white populations who wanted to subjugate them. The Bray School student list is actually a very good example. The only parents of children listed on those lists are for the free Black children. Because the majority of students, 90% of which were deemed enslaved, Their parents had no control over whether or not they attended the school, for how long, or even if they wanted their children to attend the school. It is the names of their enslavers that are alongside the names of these children in the student lists. So with these limitations, how do we address them head on while also not letting them shut us down from understanding further possibilities in the past? If we merely throw our hands up and say the archive's imperfect and therefore we can't learn anything more, are we really doing service to the individuals whose names we're trying to understand and their worlds that we're trying to see? And this is where I believe mapping can be incredibly restorative. Now, my work specifically focuses on mapping the community of Bray School scholars in Williamsburg in the 18th century. Elizabeth will talk more about mapping the community beyond the bounds, modern or 18th century of Williamsburg. And Mary Hannah will be looking, of course, more at the individual stories of particular students. So I first want to underpin my work with that. There's so many different ways to map. The way I'm doing it is just looking at the scholars themselves. How can we know more about them than just their names on a list? And in this case, I turned to Rhys Isaac and his seminal book, The Transformation of Virginia, in which he talks a great deal about landscape. And I've always liked this quote. He says, "A society necessarily leaves marks of use upon the terrain it occupies. Incised upon a society's living space appears a text for its inhabitants." And that really got me thinking. Sometimes, and I only say this myself as a public historian, we're very literal in what we define as text. It's either on a piece of paper or it's not. But what if we broaden our definition for what a text is? What if a building is a text? What if an entire city is a text? And if we broaden that perspective, how can it help us? And so that's what I want to explore with you this morning. How does our understanding of the Williamsburg Bray School, and you'll see the 1762 student list that I mentioned previously on the screen, how does our understanding of the Bray School community change when we connect written record with physical landscape? And so with that, I will ask our AV technician very kindly to click on a hyperlink that is going to take you to a digital map. I'm sure some of you have seen this map before, but for those of you who haven't, this was the question that I asked to create the digital map that I did. This was a collaborative project between the entire Williamsburg Bray School Initiative. So just to clarify, the Williamsburg Bray School Initiative is a partnership between William and Mary and Colonial Williamsburg. And what I did after writing my master's thesis in American Studies was say, how can I translate what I learned into something that is open access, publicly accessible, so that it's not behind a paywall and perhaps is more interesting than an 80-page master's thesis, if I can be honest. And so that's why I worked on this map. I want to give full credit as well, not only to the William and Mary Bray School Lab for helping support me through this work as a graduate student, but the archaeology department at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. I am not an exceptional computer programmer, and without Aaron Lovejoy and his knowledge of ArcGIS and the archaeology's willingness to say, we will fund the project when I came to them and said, I have an idea, but no money. I'm deeply appreciative for that. So what you'll see, would you mind clicking on the key that we talked about before? Thank you. So when you look at this map, what you'll see is it's a modern day city streetscape. So it'll point out some things, for example, that are modern examples, the Golden Horseshoe Golf Course. But we've overlaid on top of that modern map an 18th century map that shows, it's the most comprehensive map we have of Williamsburg, that shows where every building down to outbuildings, kitchens, and outhouses were in 1780 in Williamsburg. It's called the Frenchman's Map for any of you who've seen the original. So what we did is we placed all of those buildings, every single one, over a modern city. The buildings in red identify residences I can definitively prove Bray School scholars lived in, labored in, worked in, and built communities in, as well as being enslaved in. The buildings in blue just give you context for all the other buildings around them in the 18th century. And the building, I promise if you zoom in, you'll see it, in pink, outlined in red, is where the original Bray School was located, what is known currently as Brown Hall. There are also other different cues on the map. If you were to scroll up, you would also see an infographic for Bruton Heights, as well as other schools in the WJCC area that we've been able to identify in proximity. But as you zoom in on the city streets, what you will see affixed to each one of the red buildings are the names of the students appearing first, not the names of the buildings as they are currently defined if you were to put them into your phone or your computer to look for them on GPS. So I'm going to ask you to click on the Wren building. Again, thank you for your help. So this is just one example. What we've done is essentially I looked at hundreds of different records, baptismal records from Bruton Parish, lists of students, correspondence from enslavers, correspondence from free Black community members, written research reports, everything I could find. I spent the last 7 years putting them together in a collection and then curating them by household. So if you click on any building in red, you'll see the building name as it is currently defined. You'll see what's called the building block code. That's just a fancy term that our archaeologists use to identify every single building in the city of Williamsburg. And then you'll see the names of students who lived in those buildings. And I very intentionally picked the Wren building because we know that the College of William and Mary enslaved 2 children named Adam and Fanny, who went to the Williamsburg Bray School in 1769. You'll also see for Fanny the name of her mother, Charlotte. This name does not appear in the student list that Fanny is part of, but it does appear in the baptismal records for Bruton. So piecing different records together so that they can tell a single story and you can find it in one place. I then list the enslaver, if there is one, the occupation, perhaps to give context to what a student may have been doing, as well as whether the structure is still extant, whether you can visit it or not. I then link out to every research report I can find that is publicly accessible for any single site. So if you want to learn more, it's there. And just so you know, in the next 2 weeks, I'll not only be updating this map, since I found, fortunately, with the help of Elizabeth and others, many more family members that will be on this map, but also I've been writing up individual household bios for each one of these particular residences so that you can find it all in one place. And then, of course, you actually have a photo, if you scroll to the bottom, that will show you what the building looks like, because there's nothing more frustrating than walking through Williamsburg and trying to decide which of the 350 old buildings is the right old building you're looking for. You can also trace yourself on GPS on your phone. So actually, if you look on the screen all the way to your right, you can zoom in, you can search for individuals by name, and you can also track your coordinates if you're looking for a particular house and having a hard time finding it. So why do this? There are a lot of things I've learned through this map that I completely missed as a graduate student. For example, the Wren building, Adam and Fanny. Yes, of course, they lived at the Wren building, but they also lived next door to another student named Charlotte, who was enslaved by, on the written record, what is called Mr. Commissary. Mr. Commissary, through research I discovered, was the 6th president of William and Mary, and her residence would have been the attic of the president's house. I can read about that. I can intellectually understand it. Would you mind Xing out also now of the Wren building? Thank you. But if I can see it right next to one another, how does that change my understanding of Adam and Fanny, how they walk through the city? How does that change my understanding of what do they see? And actually, using this technology, we can eventually determine routes that show path of least resistance, the shortest amount of time it would have taken for a student to walk to the Williamsburg Bray School, and maybe start tracing walking routes for these students in the 18th century. This map isn't done. It's a living document. When I say I'm updating it next week, I really mean that because I met with Erin yesterday to update the Excel spreadsheet. And that also means that I need all of your help. Work can't be done in a silo. I'm only one person with one positionality. If this map inspires you to think about something of your family that you think should be on the map, if you notice something that you think I've missed, reach out to me. My email is ncbrown at wm.edu. Maps are a way for us to understand the landscape we live in, past and present, and in turn, start conversations. So my hope, and there will be a QR code at the end of our presentation that will take you to this map, is that this starts a conversation between you, me, and William and Mary's Bray School Lab. Thank you so much.
Hello, you'll have to bear with me. This is my first big presentation in front of lots of people. I'm used to groups of children aged roughly 5 to 16. So yeah, this is my first ever presentation. So thank you all for being here. My name is Mary Hannah. I am a former student thought partner at the Bray Lab. And I am currently a frontline museum interpreter at the Frontier Culture Museum up in Stanton. So that means my day job is essentially working on historic farms and talking to people kind of on a one-on-one basis and doing historic interpretation. But I kind of essentially cut my teeth on doing this kind of historical and public history engagement with the Bray Lab. That was kind of what drew me into this. So the question I want you guys to consider while we're kind of going through this is, in what ways can we use creative critical thinking to uncover lived possibility? So we're going to be talking about this Adam and Fanny's World map that Nicole and I put together. So I want to kind of set us off with this quote by Marisa J. Fuentes in her excellent book, Dispossessed Lives, Enslaved Women, Violence, and the Archive. She defines this concept of reading along the bias grain as a methodology by which the archival record is stretched to accentuate the figures of enslaved female women whose presence influences ontological conditions of others, but who are not mentioned in particular archives. So for our purposes, we're using that concept to kind of expand the idea of what we are able to include in the archive and kind of how we are able to use the archive to look at the blank spots between everything. And her work specifically focuses on enslaved women in the Caribbean. We're talking about a very different contextual area here, so there's a little bit of difference. But the image that you guys can see up there, that is the entry from the 1769 list for Adam and Fanny, and then as well as Charlotte, listed as being enslaved by the commissary. So Nicole actually had initiated this project and approached me and asked me if I was interested in working on it. And I said, absolutely yes, because it's a very interesting opportunity to kind of shift our perspective in the ways that we're thinking about these children and how they are moving through space in the city, in Williamsburg, in the college as well. And ultimately, we're working with a historical archive that is very limited. It does not willingly unveil certain information for us, and it's intensely biased. So how can we ethically and accurately extrapolate from that archive to try to glean individual experiences? One of the things that we did that Nicole mentioned was basically doing a lot of cross-referencing in the research for this map. This one is a little bit more kind of individualized and personalized than the one that Nicole was working on, because what we're doing is essentially creating this narrative of how these two students, Adam and Fanny, and how they and their schoolmates, their classmates, are walking through the city as they are working or as they are going to the Bray School in the morning. And yeah, that necessitates a lot of archive stretching, because not only are we starting from really just the names and then the people who enslaved these students, but we are starting from a place where we don't have anything currently that we know of, that was directly written by these students. They can't tell us what they saw when they were walking to school, but we can try to fill in some gaps. And part of that is using some creative reimagining. So we are talking about spaces that are physical places that you can walk on this college campus. One of the things that I ended up doing in the course of working on this map was going on many of these kind of suggested routes that these students might have taken through the city. I was actually, at the time of working on this map, an employee of Colonial Williamsburg. So I was working in the bookbindery, which is in the former post office building. And a lot of times on my way to work, I would actually pass many of these spots. And it's also a very common way that students move about the campus today and kind of go to class is by passing through many of these buildings. So I've got a quote here from from the kind of blog post that I did talking about the project and my process while working on it. And then the screenshot that you're seeing up there is actually from the map, which I did not have the foresight to include the link, so that's on me. But this is kind of one of the entries from it that talks about the Wren building. And basically how Adam and Fanny are waking up in the morning, how they are moving about the building, how they are, what they're seeing as they're walking through that kind of point of the triangle on campus there. So my quote here is that the present and the past are treated as parallel to one another, interacting at different sites around the city and directly connecting the people who live and work in Williamsburg now with those who did centuries ago. It's one of the interesting things that we live with being on a historic campus and in a city that has some vestiges of that physical past, is that you have these kind of realities interplaying with each other in a very real way when you're physically moving around town. And that's kind of what brings us to this as well. This is kind of the process that I went through while working on writing these narratives. I actually, fun fact is that when I was in high school and middle school, I ended up writing a lot of fiction when I was younger. So I had that kind of creative, like fictional narrative background, and trying to apply some of that creative, thinking to how I'm approaching the limited information and the blank spaces in our archives in order to kind of pull out this possible narrative. And I can read this as well. On the left, there is a photograph of the Wren building not from the Duke of Gloucester side, but from the side facing campus. That is actually a photo I took. It is, I would say, a rite of passage for William and Mary college students to take at least one photo of the Wren building at some point in your career. So as Adam and Fanny walk around to the front of the Wren building facing down Duke of Gloucester Street, they meet Charlotte, another student at the Bray School, walking from the president's house near the Wren. Charlotte is 7, old enough that she feels like a big sister to Adam and Fanny. She can recite the whole catechism without stopping, often helping Adam when he has trouble sounding out difficult words. Charlotte smiles as she approaches and pulls out a piece of still warm biscuit from her pocket, giving it to Fanny. So in our kind of imagining of this moment, I'm trying, my goal, hopefully, was to try to almost like increase the rehumanization of these students as children and as physical people who also inhabited this space, just as the students there are today. I am one of 4 children, so thankfully have some kind of experience with the way that sibling dynamics work, and for friends who feel like siblings and things like that, trying to not really project, but trying to re-encapsulate how those dynamics might have worked within the Bray School. Also connecting the sensory and physical experiences, again, talking about how, they're specifically going out towards Duke of Gloucester Street. It's one of the directions that if you're in a field trip class for the NIAD program, as I was in, you actually end up starting a lot of times on those very steps of the Wren building facing Duke of Gloucester before you kind of make the traveled all the way down Duke of Gloucester Street. So it's one that there are plenty of current students and community members who are familiar with that very route. So as a whole, a lot of the things that are going into this map in particular are asking us to kind of rethink our surroundings, rethinking how we are interacting with the space, how we actually physically see a space as we are moving through it. So narrative maps like this one are both a means of storytelling and of shifting perspective. We can kind of use the narrative to pull out yet another way that people are thinking about the places around them as they are walking through them, almost like a guided tour, but not quite. And how they are, picturing these spaces, what they think of when they're walking past these buildings. So I would challenge you, what do you think of when you pass the Wren Building, Bruton Parish Church, the President's House, other buildings in your own community? For me now, I can't walk past any of those that we talked about on really either of our maps without immediately thinking of the students, even as I have, moved away. And it's been 2 years since I worked on this project, but it's still really one of the first things I think about, particularly with Bruton Parish. I feel like it's easy to kind of look at it and go, oh, that's just a nice church. But I actually think about the way that I went to Bruton Parish and had to recontextualize my own view of it in order to actually visualize where Charlotte and where Adam and Fanny would have been sitting in the congregation. And that term that I use, the creative repeopling, which is basically just, again, using this kind of creative thinking to pull out these possibilities of the experiences these children were having, while utilizing sound historical scholarship to further humanize the students at the Bray School beyond our extant historical documents. So we're just trying to kind of fill in all of those gaps. And now I will turn it over to our next speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for sticking with us and being here this afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Drembus, and I'm the genealogist for the William and Mary Bray School Lab. My particular role is to trace the descendants of the students who attended the Bray School. And that means tracing those descendant lines from the 18th century to the present day descendants. And so we wanted to explore a little bit about in what ways do oral history and genealogy serve to map and remap the descendant community. We do have an oral historian at the lab. Unfortunately, Tanya Meredith can't be with us today, but I will speak a little bit about her work and be able to show a little bit about her work at the end of my talk. But I'm going to go ahead and just center on genealogy. And these are two quotes that I found from two groups in particular. We know there are many groups doing race and reconciliation work, but these particularly pulled on genealogy and what genealogy can do as far as that healing process. We exploring our connections to our family, exploring our connections to our community, time to share stories such as we've been doing. And I've been hearing amazing stories just the last day and a half here. And hopefully even the painful stories have also been a time of healing and reconnecting. So I wanted to bring attention to genealogy as a tool for healing. Now, we talked about mapping. And of course, there are road maps, there are street maps. But there are also family trees that can serve as a map as well. Maps show us where we're going and perhaps also where we've come from. And that seems to speak to me as a genealogist in the family tree. It can tell us where we've come from, where we are going next, where our next generations are going to be going. And so I am in the work of genealogy, working both backwards and forwards. When we think about traditional genealogy, and we are using best practices in genealogical research, traditionally, you would start with yourself and what you know, your birth date, where you were born, and then you would go to your parents' generation, and then your grandparents' generation and back as far as you can go. And we are doing that. We are working with the local descendant community here in Williamsburg that has deep roots in this community, and seeing and talking with them, engaging them in this work, serving as a resource for them in their research and their family history research to see what ties they have back to Bray School scholars. We're also doing a bit of reverse genealogy. And that means I'm starting with the names of the children on the list and moving forward in time to their children and their grandchildren. So I'm going to show two different examples in just a bit of some information that we have found, some stories that we've uncovered. But for right now, just to know that the research is unfolding and the story does begin to broaden outside of Williamsburg, basically because of the institution of slavery and the movement of people in time. And so can we map those movements of those Bray School scholars? And what does that tell us? Now, I am very fortunate to be standing on the shoulders of people who have done an amazing amount of research before I ever got here. So definitely Nicole and all of the work that she's been doing with the scholars, as well as Colonial Williamsburg research historians, as well as William and Mary scholars as well. And so I am happy to pick up where they, the information that they have found, and then move that forward. So I want to make sure that I acknowledge that this work is not done in a vacuum, and I certainly have not had all these discoveries just on my own. But I want to start with Aggie as our case study. What we know about Aggie is that she attended the Williamsburg Bray School in 1762. Because she appears on the 1762 list, that gives us her age, which means we can date her birth to circa 1755. Aggie was enslaved in the household of Peyton Randolph. And when Peyton Randolph wrote his will, and when he died in 1775, Aggie's name appears. She is bequeathed to his wife, Betty Randolph. And the estate appraisal names Aggie and two of her children. We then find Aggie next in the will of Betty Randolph in 1780. Now, Betty Randolph makes provisions to give Aggie and her two children, Betsy and Nathan, to her nephew, Benjamin Harrison VI. But Aggie's daughter, Kitty, is to go to her niece, Elizabeth Harrison. Now that took a little bit of doing, and in genealogy, it is important if you're doing research on African-American enslaved people, you must also look at the white enslaving people to understand who the players are, how the family connections are, because how will we know who this nephew, Benjamin Harrison, is? How would we know who this niece, Elizabeth Harrison, is? So going through those records of the white folks, that's where we start to find Aggie. And we talk about archival silences. In genealogy, what we're doing is trying to use records that were not necessarily made for someone in my position to be able to track these people. We need to use the records that were created at that time and in that place for probably very different reasons, but can we use those in our genealogical research? So we know that Aggie, we know that Benjamin Harrison is the Benjamin Harrison VI is the nephew of Benjamin Harrison, is the son of Benjamin Harrison V. And what we've been able to understand about Benjamin Harrison VI is he wasn't real good about managing his household. So dad goes ahead and takes care of maybe pulling those enslaved people that were given to him into his own household. And we find Aggie in the personal property tax records of Benjamin Harrison in Henrico County, he was then serving as governor of Virginia at that point in 1783. And in 1784, going through the tax records again, Benjamin Harrison V is back in Charles City County, and we see Aggie again listed in the personal property tax list. Now we've lost track of Betsy and Nathan. And when Benjamin Harrison dies, in 1791. Aggie is named in the appraisal of Benjamin Harrison, and her age is listed, and she's listed with an unnamed infant child. She's listed as infirm. Is she infirm because she has just gone through childbirth, or has something else happened to Aggie? But what we know is with that age of 36 years old in 1791, it coincides so beautifully with a circa 1755 date of birth. So we know that we still have Aggie. Now I kind of lose Aggie at that point, and we're still going to go back in through the records. We still need to track her. But what about Kitty? What about the daughter that was separated from her? We know that Elizabeth Harrison was the niece of Betty Randolph. And we find that Elizabeth Harrison marries Lewis Burwell in 1789 in Surrey County. And in 1789 is when we finally see Kitty's name again. And she is in the Burwell household. But now this is way out in Mecklenburg County where Lewis Burwell has his plantation, Stoneland. So all of a sudden we see this story stretching beyond Williamsburg. And now we've encountered Henrico County, we've seen Charles City County, and now we're in Surrey County and then into Mecklenburg County. Kitty and her children, Clarissy, Nathan, Walter Harrison, are named in the estate records for Lewis Burwell when he passes away. Kitty's named her son after her brother, Nathan. So far away from that family, but still those family ties are there. When Lewis Burwell passes away, Kitty and her children go with his second wife, Elizabeth Harrison, and her children that she has with Lewis Burwell. Fortunately, because she was the second wife, the children from the first wife get very litigious after Lewis Burwell's death. And so I am finding many, many things in Chancery Court records, including Kitty and her children. And then we see when they are divided up between Elizabeth Burwell's 4 children, we see that separation of family again. But at that time, we also see that Clarissy has 2 children. So now we've gone from Aggie, who attended the Williamsburg Bray School, to her children, her grandchildren, and her great-grandchildren. So we're not done yet. The story's still unfolding. We're still going to go back into more records. We haven't stopped, but that's where we are to date on Aggie. I want to talk a little bit about Isaac B. Am I doing okay on time? Yeah. So Isaac B. is a fascinating story as well. Isaac attended the Williamsburg Bray School in 1765. He was enslaved in the household of John Blair. John Blair sent the most children to the Williamsburg Bray School. We know that Isaac had a surname B. It's listed in the records. We know that he had 2 sisters who also attended, Clara and Johanna. And so the next time we see Isaac in the records is a runaway ad placed by Lewis Burwell in Mecklenburg County. Yes, it's the same Lewis Burwell. It's the same plantation. We now have a connection for at least 2 Bray School scholars at this same place in this county far away. How do we know that this is, what is the connection between Lewis Burwell and John Blair? Lewis Burwell is John Blair's grandson. So we do see that Isaac returns at some point, is returned or does return to Stoneland because he appears in the 1782 tax list. And in 1784, we see another B name listed in the tax record, John B. And we are working with the theory that this is now Isaac's son. So another generation has been born at Stoneland. Something happens after 1785. And we had to work a little bit forward to work a little bit backward. And sometimes that's how this work goes. In 1793, in March of 1793, there was another runaway ad placed, but this time it's in Hanover County, Virginia, which is just outside of Richmond. And in that ad, a Richard Littlepage talks about how Isaac B. has run away, formerly the property of David Lambert, formerly who purchased him from Lewis Burwell. So we had to go back and say that sometime in 1786, sometime after 1786, Isaac B is sold to David Lambert. And in 1793, in February of 1793, there was a bill of sale where Richard Littlepage, who has purchased Isaac B in conjunction with a Samuel McCraw, is selling his moiety, his portion, his share of Isaac to Samuel McCraw. So we have to pick up the story with Samuel McCraw to find Isaac B. And unfortunately, we've gotten a little bit stumped. The records have kind of dried up a little bit for us. But what we are able to see in these two different runaway ads is how Isaac is described. Louis Burwell describes Isaac's age. He's not able to describe what he was wearing, but he says he knows that he can read. And we know that reading was taught at the Williamsburg Bray School. And is that where Isaac got his education, or did he get it from his parents? These children did not come empty-headed to the school, but the education that they received at the Williamsburg Bray School is the legacy that we're trying to uncover as well. By the 1793 ad, Richard Littlepage describes Isaac, what he's wearing, and says, I know he can read and write. So we're trying to find out about that education that was received. We know that John B., his son, is still in Louis Burwell's household. And the great thing about Mecklenburg County property tax records, personal property tax records, is they named the enslaved up until about 1812. So we're able to track John B. through those records. And John B. is named in the inventory of Louis Burwell. In the Chancery Court records, we haven't been able to establish which heir John B. would have gone to, because at that point, the heirs dropped the B surname in the records, and there are 3 Johns, so we're still trying to track. So we're going to track 3 different Johns through the records. So that's just a little bit of the work that we're doing in the genealogy. And so I did reference that Tanya Meredith is our oral historian, and we are trying to collect the stories and connect with the descendants. And so because this telling of the stories, and certainly what I've witnessed over the last day and a half, is that these telling of the stories is an act of healing and a reconnecting and a discovery. And it's important for us at the lab to include and give equal authority and equal weight to the oral history as well as the genealogical research. And Tanya and I work very, very closely because we're constantly bouncing ideas off of each other and looking at things from very different ways, and it really enhances the record, or enhances the research. So I wanted to just play, do we have time to play okay. So if you could play, their oral histories are being recorded, and Tanya is working hard to get all of these loaded up. They will be shared on our website. They're being housed at SWEM Library here at William and Mary. This is a compilation of things to come. Is it live? No, it's not live. Oh, it's not working. I don't have a mouse up here. Just keep going. Okay. Okay. If we can't get it to work, I will just encourage you to visit the website. I would encourage you to visit our website, which is Bray Lab. Oh, you're going to show that. You're going to have that slide. Okay. All right. So anyway, that I'm going to stop there. I'm happy to take questions about the research that we're doing. And also, if any of you know of or are connected to descendants or long lineages here in Williamsburg, we'd love to talk with you. We'd love to help be a resource for your own family research. So thank you.
Thank you again to our presenters. We will now move into question and answer. And do we have a mic for the audience? And let me say, while that mic is being handed over, in terms of contacting the lab, we have, our, of course, our individual emails. Bray Lab, BRAYLAB at wm.edu. So braylab@wilmary.edu is our lab email. Anything that comes there is going to get forwarded to the right party. Also, if you want to see the 6 videos that have been completed and are available, if you go to our website, again, the QR code is there. We're easy to find. If you just Google Bray School Lab, William Mary Bray School Lab, you'll get to our lab. We're in the research portal. So research and engagement, the research portal has a transcription of 18th century documents, many of which have recordings now attached to them, so you can hear them. But you'll also see photographs, and you'll see right now what are the first 6 oral histories that are done and available, and those are being updated as more are going through the editing and permission process. Questions? Professor Watson.
I just had a quick question for the last presenter. You mentioned that the surname B was dropped in 1812. What was the reason for that?
It wasn't necessarily that the family was dropping that name. It was that the people creating the records stopped using it in the records. Sometimes we see it, BEE, in the record, and then after 1804, we don't see it anymore. So it would made it hard to distinguish between those. Now, we do know that there were B family in Northumberland County. We have not been able to connect the free B family to Isaac and to his son John in the Williamsburg area. And we do know there is evidence in 1870 of B family members in Goochland County. I believe Dr. Johnson was able to refer me to that record. We don't know whether those Bs connect with Northumberland or also connect to Isaac.
Can you mention, Elizabeth, the evening discussions that you've been holding to kind of update everyone about what you're doing? Because I find them fascinating.
Oh,
that you're
thank
just
you.
continuing to share that information.
Right, thank you. So last fall, we started a monthly Zoom series. It's usually the last Monday evening of each month. We're calling them Bray School Stories. And we take one scholar each month, and I host basically a conversation to show what the latest research is, methodology, where the records are, pictures of the records, and also enlist the help of people online to observe things that perhaps I've missed when I'm looking at these records. And so we've done one on Aggie, we've done Isaac B., Molly, and we just had one last week on Mary and Elisha Jones as well. So yes, so on our lab website, under events, is usually the way to register. It's free to register, but to get the Zoom link, you'd need to register.
And the past recordings are available on our William Mary Bray School Lab YouTube channel. So you can see all the past sessions of the Finding Bray School students. Thank you for that.
We have an online question.
Yes.
Ask, what was the impact of the Revolutionary War on students and the school community?
Let me just preface that before the panelists. So we know that the Bray School closes in August of 1774. When Ann Wager dies, it does not reopen. So the school has closed by the time of the Revolution, and that is not to say that there's not an impact, but I just want to be clear about the timeline of the school. I know our panelists will have more to say.
Yeah, this is a great question because it's something that I'm continuously working on in my research as well as with the students working at the William and Mary Bray School Lab. So we have a timeline that we've been working on called the Standing in the Gap Project. And that effectively creates a seasonal timeline that we're getting ready to finish up. Between the death of Ann Wager on August 20th, 1774, and the ceasing of all Bray School operations in North America on April 1st of 1777. Since there were several different Bray schools, the Philadelphia Bray School, the Newport, Rhode Island Bray School, the Fredericksburg Bray School, and the New York City Bray School. They actually tried to establish 8 different schools in Virginia, which is a separate part of my research as well. But effectively, it seems that all of the Bray schools were shut down during the American Revolution or prior to it in certain cases, like the Williamsburg Bray School, in part because the Bray Associates themselves don't want to fund institutions that they describe as being in a war zone. What is interesting, though, is that there are Bray schools that crop up after the American Revolution. The one in Philadelphia reopens in 1786. I'm still doing research. My doctoral research is on all of the Bray schools across all of North America. That one was open at least until 1949. And then there were other Bray schools started in Nova Scotia by Free Black Loyalists, as well as in the Caribbean. When it comes to Williamsburg, though, a lot of the research that we're trying to do to determine how the war impacted the students ties back to a comment Elizabeth brought up, is that we have to also look at the enslavers connected to these enslaved households, as well as the free Black families and how they're laboring and living during the American Revolution. The Ashby family is a good example of different connections to the American Revolution, as is the Randolph household. Aggie, who Elizabeth just mentioned, was one of 3 students we know went to the Bray School. One of them, Sam, in a probate inventory, so Peyton Randolph passes away, so it's an estate of what he defines and others define as his property, including enslaved individuals, lists Sam as, quote, having gone to the enemy, end quote. We don't know what happened to Sam beyond that yet. We're still looking, but it appears that he fled and self-emancipated during Dunmore's proclamation during 1775. So the answer to your question is it's complicated and we're still working on getting better answers. But the American Revolution certainly did have an impact individually as for Williamsburg Bray School students, as well as collectively for Bray schools across the Atlantic world.
Right. And we are also combing the Book of Negroes
Yep.
to see if any of the individuals who left out of New York in 1783 could possibly have been former students or family members of former students who went to the Bray School. Because at the end of the day, as Nicole's already implied, this is at its core a diaspora story. We look at certain locations, but the story and the tentacles go out much, much farther than Williamsburg or even Virginia. Oh, I'm sorry. The Book of Negroes, thank you. The Book of Negroes was essentially the record. It was required. George Washington required there to be an accounting of those Blacks who left the United States. Remember 1775, Lord Dunmore's proclamation promised freedom to those who would fight on the side of the British during the American Revolution. The caveat, of course, would you had to survive it. But in 1783, when those ships pulled out of New York, Washington required there to be an accounting of those. It's been come to known as the Book of Negroes. It's been dramatized. It has been imagined in different ways, but is known as the Book of Negroes. It is an accounting, and you can actually find Graham Russell Hodges was known as the Black Loyalist Directory for a long time. It's been republished as under the title Book of Negroes. Graham Russell Hodges, Hodges, has reissued in essence, and you can actually find it on Amazon, if not in your local library. Other questions? I'm not sure where the microphone is.
It's here.
Thank you.
Dr.
Yes, hi.
Hi, where are you? Dr. Allen passed this to me, so I assume that means that I'm next. Thank you very much for those really wonderful presentations and the work that you're doing, which is all very interconnected. I can see the collaboration, and that's very impressive. I was curious about the advertisements that you found for Isaac be put in a newspaper by his enslaver looking for help, trying to find him after he chose to take the risk to try to free himself. And so in addition to knowing something about what he looks like from the description in the advertisement, you also have evidence that he chose to take the risk to try to free himself. And so I'm just curious if you're thinking about that and weaving that into the story. And I know from having read many of these advertisements that sometimes it speculates about where the person might have gone and with whom they might be. And I'm wondering if advertisements in Isaac's case or in general for Bray School scholars, if you're finding ways of connecting them to other people and mapping even beyond the path to the Bray School, which is wonderful, but even more what their lives, what terrain their lives might have crossed.
Right, so the difference in the two ads are, so we know in the 74 ad, it had been 2 months that Isaac was gone before Louis Burwell placed the ad in the Virginia Gazette. And Burwell writes that he, let's see, where does it say? Oh, here, whoever apprehends the said slave and delivers him to me or to Mrs. Burwell in Williamsburg. Oh, he says, he is well known about Williamsburg, where I am informed he has been several times since his elopement. So, go ahead. Yep.
One other thing in that ad, which I also think is really important, is it says, quote, he thinks he is entitled to his freedom because his father is free. And I do want to say there are many people in this room who do an extensive amount of work with runaway ads. Dr. Rosen, I know you do. And then I also want to mention Hope Wright, who presented with the William and Mary Bray School Lab last year in the Lemon Project on runaway ads and what that says about enslavement and materiality, especially connected to Black women. So your question of how are people connecting and mapping and using runaway ads in different ways, I think is a good one, because the answer is that work is already happening and ongoing. And I think with runaway ads, for context, they are ads that are placed by usually an enslaver to try to reclaim what they perceive as their property, in this case, an enslaved person. And so the challenge always is sifting through the bias of the enslaver. There are things that they might speculate they do or don't know, because if they knew it, that would be quote unquote embarrassing to an enslaver. But if you sift through that bias, those runaway ads can tell a much fuller picture about someone's life geographically, as well as individually, right? So I think especially with Isaac B, that's especially important. The piece that's always struck me about the 1793 ad is that he takes several saddlebags with legal documents in them. I don't have anything else to comment on other than I have questions about that. Yeah. I don't know if you wanna- Yeah.
The question was asking for a definition of materiality in the context it was used.
Yes, I'm so glad you asked this question, and please forgive my own positionality because
It will have to be brief.
Yep, it'll be brief. Materiality in this case is the material objects of the world that help us understand a person. So not just written record, but what they might have been wearing, what they might have been holding and carrying with them, what they might have been working upon or with. So when I say materiality, that's what I mean. How do we understand the material objects around a person's life, and what do they say about them?
I think we should have time for one more.
Yeah, I just have one quick question, I think for Nicole. Your mapping, I love the mapping and the connections to the descendants in the buildings. Can you talk about the time frame of the French map and your overlay to the historical colonial Williamsburg?
So the Frenchman's map is a map from the early 1780s. Again, talking about positionality of people and documents. It was done by a French soldier traveling through during the American Revolution, hence it being colloquially known as the Frenchman's map. He was very, very detailed, incredibly specific. In fact, one of the reasons we know where the Bray School even was located is that he actually identifies the exact locations for pretty much every building, almost every building in Williamsburg. The challenge with using this map is, yes, it's about a decade out from the last years of the Bray School operating. But if you pair the map with other written records to make sure that there weren't significant changes to the landscape, which in many cases there weren't at that point, it is the closest map we can get to what Williamsburg looked like in the late 1770s. There are other comparative maps, but this is the most comprehensive one because it doesn't only focus on the main residence, but all of the constellation of residences that can be found on a property, whether they're defined that way or not.
Thank you. Let me thank our panelists for intellectually engaging conversation. And again, the power of collaboration bears out. We will take our leave of the area up here, but if people want to engage with questions, we are happy to continue the conversation. We know there are others who are ready to get ready for the next session. Let me say just finally, the research has shown in our session and other sessions that this has to be, at the end of the day, a broader community effort. We're never going to be able to answer the questions we want. We are never going to be able to find the children that we are so actively and passionately looking for without collaboration, university community, cross institutions, churches, organizations, across races, to be quite frank. April 15th through the 20th is Descendant Week for the William and Mary Bray School Lab, our third Descendant Week. We'll have a number of activities, both virtual and in person. We kick off with a virtual town hall, and I'm really making this an appeal to the community more broadly, asking you to be part of that town hall because the answers that we seek are also lying in documents or other things that are in attics and family papers. And these are not necessarily families of the enslaved, but families of enslavers. We are working in search of history, in search of truth as a shared objective and goal. Thank you.